Have you ever wondered what silence sounds like when the temperature drops to 30 degrees below zero? It is not the comfortable silence of a quiet room or the peaceful hush of a library. It is something deeper, something almost alive in its stillness. The air itself seems to freeze into place. Sound travels differently when the world is that cold. A branch snapping a mile away reaches your ears with startling clarity. Your own breathing becomes loud, almost intrusive, against the vast emptiness that surrounds you. And beneath it all, there is a kind of pressure, a weight to the silence that settles on your chest and makes you aware of just how alone you truly are tonight. We are stepping back through time to a place where that silence was a nightly companion. We are traveling to the frozen frontier of the American Wild West, to the years when settlers, miners, cowboys, and dreamers pushed westward into territories that had no mercy for the unprepared. These were lands of extraordinary beauty and extraordinary danger. In summer, the plains stretched golden and endless under skies so blue they seemed painted by some heavenly hand. But in winter, those same plains became something else entirely. They became a test, a trial, a question asked over and over again through the long, dark months. Can you survive another night? Before we begin this quiet journey together, I would love a small favor from you. If your heart is ready to wander back through history with me tonight, tap that like button. It helps other nighttime travelers find these stories. Subscribe if you have not already, so you will always be part of these late-night passages into history's forgotten corners. And leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Some of you are wrapped in the stillness of midnight. Others are just beginning your morning, perhaps with coffee warming your hands. Wherever you are, whatever hour holds you, you are welcome here. Now, dim the lights if you can. Perhaps turn on a gentle fan for that soothing background hum. Settle into your blankets, adjust your pillow, and let us walk together into the frozen past. Imagine yourself standing on the Wyoming plains in January of 1872. The sky above you is colorless, a pale sheet stretched thin between the brown earth and some distant heaven you can barely remember. Snow has been falling for 3 days now. It began soft and gentle, almost beautiful, but the wind came on the second day and turned that soft snow into something weapon-like, driving it sideways in sheets that sting your exposed skin like tiny needles. You have pulled your hat low and wrapped your scarf across your face until only your eyes remain visible. And even they water against the bitter assault of the wind. You are miles from the nearest town. The word town is generous anyway. It is really just a collection of buildings huddled together against the emptiness. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a few dozen souls trying to scratch out lives in a place that seems determined to refuse them. But even that small gathering of humanity feels impossibly far away right now. Between you and those distant buildings lies nothing but white. White ground, white sky, white wind that howls and moans like something alive and hungry. Your cabin waits ahead, though calling it a cabin requires imagination. It is a collection of rough-hewn logs, cut hastily during the brief building season when the ground was soft enough to work. The logs have settled unevenly over the months, and gaps have opened between them where the wind whispers through despite your best efforts to seal them. You have stuffed those gaps with everything you could find. Mud and moss when they were available, old rags torn from worn-out clothes, even pages from the few books you brought west with you. Words from distant authors now serving as insulation against the killing cold as you push through the final distance to your door. Fighting wind that seems personally determined to push you back. You think about what waits inside. Not warmth, exactly. Your cabin has never been truly warm, not in winter, but shelter, protection, a barrier, however imperfect, between your body and the vast indifference of the frozen world. Tonight, like every night this season, your goal is simple. You want to sleep. You want to rest your aching body, close your burning eyes, and wake again when morning light filters gray and weak through the gaps in your walls. You want to survive another night, but sleep in this place, in this time, is never simple. The rhythm of your days follows the sun with ruthless consistency. You rise before dawn because there is no choice in the matter. The fire has died to embers during the night, and if you do not stoke it soon, the cold will creep so deeply into your bones that even movement becomes a battle. Your breath hangs visible in the air inside your cabin, clouding before your face like small ghosts escaping with each exhalation. The single room you call home has frosted over on the inside of its walls. Delicate patterns of ice climb the rough wood like nature's own decoration, beautiful in a terrible way. Evidence of how thoroughly the cold has penetrated your shelter. Your boots wait where you left them, near the hearth, and even from here you can see they have gone stiff overnight. The leather has frozen rigid despite your careful placement near the dying fire. You know from hard experience that forcing your feet into frozen boots invites disaster. Frostbite comes quickly when cold leather presses against warm skin. So you wait, crouched by the fire. You are coaxing back to life, feeding it, kindling one small piece at a time. You cannot afford to be wasteful. Firewood is precious out here, and you are running low. Every stick represents labor, represents hours spent in the cold with an axe, represents a future night of warmth or a future night of dangerous, deepening cold. This is how every day begins on the winter frontier. This is the memory you carry with you through all your waking hours. The knowledge that tonight you will have to do it all again. That before you can rest, you must prepare. That sleep itself has become work, requiring effort and planning and hope. And beneath all of this, there is the understanding that not everyone who closes their eyes on a winter night opens them again in the morning. The frontier has taken people in their sleep. Good people, careful people, people who did everything right and still woke frozen or did not wake at all. This is what we will explore together tonight. The fragile, precious art of sleep in a place where sleeping itself was an act of quiet courage. We will walk through drafty cabins and crowded bunkhouses. We will lie down on straw mattresses and frozen ground. We will meet those who survived and honor those who did not. We will touch the strange mysteries and folk practices that emerged when ordinary people faced extraordinary cold. The fire is burning now. The cabin is as warm as it will get tonight. Your blankets wait, cold but necessary. Outside, the wind continues its eternal conversation with the land. And somewhere in the darkness, wolves are beginning to howl. The sound rises and falls, mournful and wild. A reminder that you are not alone in this frozen world, though the company offers little comfort. Let us settle in now. Let us step fully into this quiet history together. The night is long, and there is much to see, much to feel, much to understand about those who slept in the cold so that someday, generations later, others might sleep in warmth. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the weight of wool blankets on your body. Imagine the smell of wood smoke and the distant howling of wind. Imagine the particular kind of tired that comes from fighting the cold all day. A tiredness that settles not just in your muscles but in your very soul. Now open them again, because our journey is just beginning. Let us step inside your shelter now and discover what protection actually meant on the frozen frontier. You have fought your way through the wind and snow, and your hand finds the rough wooden latch that holds your door closed. The door itself is nothing fancy, just planks of wood fitted together as tightly as time and skill allowed, hung on leather hinges that creak with cold as you push it open. You step inside quickly and pull the door shut behind you, leaning against it for a moment, as if your body weight might help seal out the winter that wants so desperately to follow you in. Inside is dark. The single window, if you can call it that, offers no real light on a day like this. There is no glass in the window. Glass is expensive and impossibly far away, requiring transport across hundreds of miles of difficult terrain. So instead, you have stretched oiled paper across the opening, the kind made by soaking ordinary paper in linseed oil until it becomes somewhat translucent. On bright summer days, it lets in a pale, watery glow. On winter afternoons like this one, it barely acknowledges the existence of daylight at all. You have hung a scrap of canvas over it anyway, adding one more layer between you and the cold that seeps through every possible opening. Your eyes adjust slowly to the dimness. The cabin is small. Most frontier cabins were small because small spaces were easier to heat, easier to build, and easier to defend against the elements. This one measures perhaps 12 feet by 14 feet, a single room that serves as kitchen, bedroom, living space, and storage area all at once. The ceiling is low, barely high enough for a tall man to stand upright, and the beams that support the roof are rough logs with the bark still clinging in places. The walls around you tell a story of hasty construction and desperate repair. The logs were cut during the brief window of good weather when building was possible, and they were cut fast, without the careful seasoning that makes logs fit snugly together. They have dried and shrunk in the months since, and gaps have opened between them. Some of these gaps are as wide as your finger. You have spent hours stuffing these gaps with whatever you could find: mud mixed with grass, dried moss gathered before the snow came, rags torn from clothing to worn to serve any other purpose. In one corner, you can see pages from an old newspaper, the words of distant cities now serving as insulation against the wind. None of it is enough. The drafts still find their way through, cold fingers exploring the darkness, searching for any warmth to steal. The floor beneath your feet is rough planking laid directly on the frozen ground. In summer, you could feel the coolness of the earth rising through the gaps between boards, which was pleasant then. Now that same earth breathes cold upward with relentless persistence. Some nights you swear the cold comes more intensely from below than from any other direction, as if the frozen ground itself is trying to claim your heat, your life, your sleep. Above you, the roof presents its own challenges. It is layers of sod laid over rough planking, a common construction method on the frontier where lumber was scarce and prairie grass was abundant. When dry, sod provides decent insulation. But sod is never truly dry in winter. Snow falls on it and slowly melts from whatever warmth escapes upward from your fire. That meltwater seeps down through the layers, sometimes finding gaps in the planking beneath and dripping into your living space. You have positioned a bucket in one corner to catch the most persistent drip. The sound of water falling into that bucket, slow and irregular, becomes part of the nighttime symphony you have learned to sleep through in the deepest cold. The sod freezes solid, which stops the dripping but creates a different problem. Any warmth from your fire rises to the ceiling and melts the underside of that frozen mass just slightly, creating a layer of dampness that never quite resolves. The ceiling is perpetually moist, and occasionally small chunks of frozen earth release and fall onto whatever lies beneath them. You have learned not to position your bed directly under the most vulnerable spots. The hearth is the heart of this space. The reason any of it is bearable at all. It is a simple construction of stacked stones gathered from a nearby creek bed and mortared together with more mud. The chimney draws adequately most of the time, though when the wind comes from certain directions, smoke backs up into the room and you must choose between breathing and warmth. On those nights, you crack the door just slightly, letting in a blade of cold air that improves the draft but also lowers the temperature. Everything in frontier life is a trade, a negotiation between bad options and worse ones near the hearth. Your meager possessions cluster together as if seeking warmth themselves. A cast iron pot hangs from a hook, blackened by countless fires. A few tin plates and cups sit on a rough shelf. Your tools lean against the wall, an axe for wood, a shovel for snow, and other necessities. There is a trunk that holds your extra clothes, your few treasured items, the small pieces of your former life that survived the journey west. And there is your bed. We will explore the bed more fully soon. But for now, notice how it sits against the wall, opposite the fire, positioned to receive whatever radiant heat the flames can offer, while remaining far enough away to avoid sparks. The blankets piled upon it are your most valuable possessions in winter, more precious than money, more essential than food in some ways. Without those blankets, without the buffalo robe traded from a passing hunter, without the quilt your mother stitched before you left everything familiar behind, you would not survive the nights. The smell of this space is particular and complex. Wood smoke dominates, of course, a smell that has worked its way into everything you own. Your clothes, your hair, your blankets. Beneath that is the smell of damp earth from the sod above, mineral and organic at once. There is the smell of your own body, because bathing in winter is nearly impossible and hot water is a luxury spent on cooking, not cleaning. There is the faint smell of the tallow candles you can rarely afford to burn, the animal fat they are made from giving off a heavy, slightly rancid odor. And beneath it all, there is the smell of cold itself, sharp and clean, cutting through all the other scents like a knife. The sounds of your cabin are equally distinct. The wind outside moans constantly, finding different voices as it passes different gaps and angles in your structure. The fire crackles and pops, speaking its own language of combustion. The logs of your walls crack and groan as they contract in the cold. Sharp sounds that startle you even after months of hearing them. And beneath these sounds is the silence, that heavy frontier silence we spoke of before, pressing against your walls like a physical weight. This is your shelter. This is what stands between you and the winter that would kill you in hours if given the chance. It is not comfortable. It is not warm. It does not feel safe in any meaningful sense of the word. But it is yours, and it is enough, barely enough, to allow you to close your eyes each night with some hope of opening them in the morning. The frontier cabin was not a home in the way we understand homes today. It was more like a negotiation, a temporary truce between human need and natural indifference. The wind agreed not to collapse your walls if you agreed to let it whisper through the gaps. The cold agreed not to kill you outright if you agreed to feed the fire all night. The roof agreed to mostly keep out the weather if you agreed not to expect too much. You lived within these agreements, slept within them, dreamed within them. And when spring finally came, you stepped outside and looked at your cabin and marveled that such a fragile thing had kept you alive through another winter. But we are still in the depths of that winter now. Spring is months away, barely imaginable. Your cabin waits around you, cold and damp and full of drafts. Your bed waits in the corner, and the long night stretches ahead, full of its particular challenges and comforts. Let us turn our attention now to that bed, to the place where you will lay your exhausted body and try to find rest in this frozen world. The bed calls to you now with a promise it cannot entirely keep. You are tired in ways that people in gentler climates rarely understand. Not just sleepy, but bone deep, exhausted from the constant battle against cold, from the physical labor of survival, from the mental effort of staying alert to danger through every waking hour. Your body craves rest with an intensity that feels almost painful. And yet you know that the bed waiting in the corner of your cabin offers only the possibility of sleep, not the guarantee of comfort. Let us look at this bed together, really look at it, and understand what sleep meant for ordinary people on the winter frontier. The frame is simple, probably the simplest furniture in your cabin, because fancy bed frames were a luxury few could afford or transport into the wilderness. Yours is made of rough lumber, 4 posts connected by rails, the whole thing standing perhaps a foot off the frozen floor. This elevation is important. Air circulating beneath the bed helps prevent the direct transfer of cold from the earth below, and it keeps your bedding away from any water that might seep across the floor during sudden thaws. But 1 foot of air is not much insulation against ground that has frozen solid to a depth of several feet across the frame. Instead of the metal springs that would become common in later decades, there are ropes. These ropes are strung in a grid pattern, pulled tight and woven over and under each other to create a surface that can support your weight. When new and properly tightened, rope bedding offers reasonable support with just enough give to be comfortable. But ropes stretch over time, especially when bearing weight night after night. You have to tighten them periodically using a special tool, a wooden key that you twist to take up the slack. This is where the old saying comes from, the one about sleeping tight. But no matter how carefully you maintain them, the ropes never feel quite right. They sag in the middle, creating a kind of hammock effect that puts strain on your back. The grid pattern presses through whatever padding lies above, making itself known against your body throughout the night. On top of the ropes lies your mattress, though this word also requires imagination. It is a cloth sack, really, sewn from ticking fabric and stuffed with whatever filling you could manage. In wealthier Eastern homes, mattresses might be filled with feathers or horsehair, materials that held their shape and provided genuine cushioning. Out here, you have used what the land provides: prairie grass, gathered by the armful during the brief weeks when it grew tall and dry. Straw from whatever crops managed to grow on your small claim. Corn husks saved from the harvest and dried in the autumn sun. These materials compress under your weight, flatten over the course of the winter, and eventually provide so little padding that you can feel every rope beneath your body. The smell of the mattress is vegetal and slightly dusty, hay and dried grass mingling with the smoke that permeates everything. In summer, you might notice small creatures living in the stuffing, insects and sometimes mice that have found the warm, dry interior irresistible. In winter, the cold drives most of these unwanted companions out, which is one small mercy. But the mattress also absorbs moisture from your body and from the damp cabin air, becoming slightly clammy in ways that are hard to describe and impossible to avoid. Your blankets are more critical than the mattress, more valuable than almost anything else you own. The primary blanket is wool, thick and heavy and slightly scratchy against your skin. Wool has a miraculous property that frontier people understood well. It keeps you warm even when wet, unlike cotton or linen, which become dangerously chilling when damp. This is essential because moisture is constant in your sleeping environment. Your breath condenses in the cold air, settles on your blankets, and freezes into tiny crystals overnight. By morning, the edges of your coverings are often stiff with frost, crackling slightly as you push them back. Without wool's insulating properties, this moisture would accelerate heat loss and make sleep genuinely dangerous. You have more than one blanket, because one is never enough. Layering is everything on the frontier. Each additional layer traps a pocket of air between itself and the layer below, and this still air provides insulation. So you pile them up, 2 blankets, 3, as many as you have managed to acquire through purchase, trade, or gifts from those leaving the territory. The weight of multiple blankets is substantial, pressing down on your body throughout the night. Some find this comforting, a sense of being held and protected. Others find it restrictive, making it difficult to shift position when hips and shoulders begin to ache. If you are fortunate, you also have a buffalo robe. These were the premium sleeping covers of the frontier, traded from hunters or indigenous peoples who had hunted bison for generations. A good buffalo robe is extraordinarily heavy, sometimes 20 pounds or more, and the smell is strong. Animal and smoke from the tanning process, impossible to fully remove. But the insulation they provide is unmatched. The thick fur traps enormous amounts of air, creating a barrier against cold that lighter covers cannot match. Beneath a buffalo robe, you can almost forget the temperature outside. Almost, if you are part of a family. The bed becomes a shared space in ways that modern sensibilities might find uncomfortable. Children sleep with parents, pressed together for warmth, their small bodies contributing heat and also stealing it, depending on how they position themselves in the night. Married couples sleep intertwined, not from affection, though that may be present too, but from necessity. Two bodies generate twice the heat and lose it more slowly when pressed together. Modesty gives way to survival. On the coldest nights, even families who might normally allow older children their own sleeping spaces will gather everyone into one bed, piling children between parents, adding the dog if there is one, creating a mass of warm bodies beneath every blanket the household owns. In the bunkhouses of mining camps and cattle ranches, the sharing takes a different form. Narrow bunks line the walls, stacked 2 or sometimes 3 high, with barely enough room for a man to roll over without hitting the bunk above or below. These men are strangers to each other in daylight, competing for work, for food, for space. But at night, they become something else, a community bound by shared vulnerability. The heat from their collective bodies warms the bunkhouse more effectively than the single stove in the center. Their breathing, their coughing, their occasional snoring creates a kind of human music that some find comforting and others find maddening. Privacy is impossible. You hear everything, smell everything, feel the bunk shake when the man above you shifts position. But you are not alone, and on nights when the wind screams and the temperature plunges, not being alone matters more than any discomfort. The process of actually getting into bed is its own small ordeal. Your blankets have been sitting in the ambient temperature of the cabin all day, absorbing cold, holding it, waiting to share it with your body. Sliding between them is a shock, a gasp-inducing moment when the chill fabric contacts your skin through whatever clothes you have kept on. Some have learned to warm stones in the fire, wrap them in cloth, and place them between the blankets before bed, creating pockets of heat that make the initial moments bearable. These stones work for perhaps an hour before becoming merely heavy, cooling masses that must be pushed aside or removed. Others simply steel themselves, dive into the cold bedding, curl into tight balls, and wait for body heat to slowly, painfully slowly, transform their bed into something approaching warmth. You do not undress for bed. This cannot be emphasized enough. The idea of removing clothes in this cold, of exposing more skin to the frigid air even for a moment, is absurd, dangerous, almost unthinkable. You sleep in your wool shirt, your long underwear if you have them, your thick socks. On colder nights, you keep your trousers on. On the coldest nights, your coat becomes an additional blanket, spread across the top of everything else, your hat pulled down over your ears. Dignity is for people with reliable heating. Comfort is for people who can afford to make choices. You simply do what survival requires. Now you are in bed, curled into yourself, knees pulled toward your chest, hands tucked between your thighs or under your arms. You have made yourself as small as possible because surface area loses heat and you cannot afford to lose any more than necessary. Your breath frosts in the air above your face, small clouds that form and dissipate in the darkness. You pull the blankets up until only your nose and eyes remain exposed, creating a small tunnel of air that your breath will gradually warm, This is the position you will maintain, more or less, for the next 8 or 10 or 12 hours. Sleep in winter is not restful movement, not comfortable repositioning. It is careful stillness, conservation, patience. If you are enjoying this quiet journey through history, this would be a lovely moment to tap that subscribe button. There are many more late-night passages waiting, more forgotten stories to explore together. Now settle deeper into your own warm blankets and let us continue. Sleep on the frontier was not something that simply happened when you became tired. It was something you prepared for, planned for, worked toward through the darkening hours of late afternoon and evening. Like so much of frontier life, sleep required ritual, and these rituals became as important psychologically as they were practically. They were the way you told yourself that everything would be all right, that you had done what could be done, that the night might be survived. Let us walk through this ritual together. From the moment the thin winter light begins to fail until the moment you finally lie down and surrender to whatever rest the cold will allow, the sun gives up its fight against winter early in these territories. By 4 in the afternoon, sometimes earlier when clouds press low against the land, the light has faded to a gray dimness that makes work difficult and navigation treacherous. You have been watching the sky all afternoon, tracking the sun's descent, calibrating your remaining tasks against the shrinking hours of visibility. There is always more to do than daylight allows. Always repairs that need making, wood that needs splitting, animals that need tending. But winter days are short and winter nights are long, and you have learned to accept that some things must wait for tomorrow. The failing light triggers the first step in your evening ritual. You check your firewood supply, both the pile stacked against the cabin wall and the smaller stack you keep inside near the hearth. The inside stack is critical. It represents the wood you will burn through the night, the fuel that will keep your fire alive until morning. You have learned to bring wood inside hours before you need it, allowing it to dry and warm slightly, making it easier to burn. Wet wood or frozen wood burns poorly, smoking and sputtering, consuming itself without generating the heat you desperately need. You count the logs, estimate how long each might burn, calculate whether you have enough to last until dawn. This calculation is never certain. So much depends on the temperature outside, on the strength of the wind, on whether you will wake in the night to tend the fire or sleep through crucial hours. You have learned to err on the side of too much when possible, but too much is often not possible. Wood is finite. Your strength to gather it is finite. The trees within reasonable distance of your cabin have already been picked over by you and by others who settled here before you. With your firewood assessed, you turn to the fire itself. Banking the coals is an art you have learned through trial and much error. The goal is to create a fire that will burn low and slow through the night, maintaining enough heat to keep the cabin above freezing while preserving enough fuel to last until morning. You push the burning logs together, concentrating the heat. You add a final log, a large one, placing it carefully so air can circulate beneath it. Then you cover the whole arrangement with ash, scooped from the edges of the hearth and sprinkled over the flames until they dim but do not die. The ash slows the combustion, stretching your limited fuel across more hours. Getting this right is crucial. If you bank too aggressively, the fire will smother and die, leaving you to wake in a cabin that has dropped to freezing or below, with the difficult task of starting a new fire in darkness and cold. If you bank too lightly, the fire will burn bright and fast, consuming your wood long before dawn and leaving you in the same predicament. You have learned your hearth's particular preferences through a winter's worth of nights, and you have developed an intuition that serves you most of the time. But most of the time is not all of the time, and every night carries uncertainty. While the fire settles into its slow burn, you prepare your evening meal. Calling it a meal stretches the definition, but words are flexible things when survival is concerned. You have a pot of something simmering on the hearth, something made from whatever ingredients you have managed to preserve or purchase. Dried beans are common, soaked since morning, and now soft enough to eat. A bit of salt pork, if you have been fortunate in your supplies, its fat flavoring the liquid and providing precious calories. Wild game if you managed to hunt recently, though winter hunting is difficult and often unsuccessful. Water melted from snow, because hauling water from a frozen creek is exhausting work you avoid when possible. You eat slowly, sitting as close to the fire as you can manage. A bowl or plate warming your hands through the thin metal. The food is bland and often the same thing you ate yesterday and will eat tomorrow. But it is warm, and warmth inside your body matters as much as warmth around it. You chew carefully, making the meal last, because eating is one of the few pleasures available in winter evenings, and ending it means confronting the hours of darkness that remain. After eating, you clean your dishes with minimal water, scraping food residue and wiping surfaces rather than truly washing. Water is too precious for proper cleaning, and dishes that are merely scraped clean will serve well enough. You return your utensils to their shelf, your pot to its hook near the hearth, where it will stay warm for tomorrow. Now comes the checking. You move through your small cabin with a thoroughness that might seem excessive to someone who has never survived a frontier winter. You check the door, confirming that it is firmly latched against the wind and against animals that might be drawn by the scent of food or the promise of warmth. Wolves have been known to push through doors that are not properly secured. Even smaller animals, desperate with winter hunger, will enter if given the opportunity, eating anything they can find and leaving chaos in their wake. You check the window covering, making sure the canvas and oiled paper are properly positioned to block drafts. You check the gaps in your walls, pressing your hand against the areas where you have stuffed rags and paper, feeling for the cold tendrils of air that indicate the insulation has shifted or failed. When you find a draft, you add material, stuffing more cloth into the gap, knowing it is temporary but doing it anyway. You check your boots, positioning them carefully near the hearth where they will absorb what warmth they can without getting so hot that the leather cracks or burns. Tomorrow morning, you will need to put these boots on quickly in a cabin that has grown cold overnight. If the boots are frozen stiff, as they will be if positioned too far from the fire, you will lose precious time and risk frostbite on your feet as you try to force them on. If the boots are damaged by too much heat, you face a potentially fatal problem, because boots cannot be easily replaced on the frontier, especially in winter. You lay out tomorrow's clothes, such as they are, placing them near the hearth as well. Your shirt, your trousers, your coat. In the morning, these will still be cold, but less cold than if they spent the night in the far corners of your cabin. Every degree matters. Every small preparation is a hedge against the morning's inevitable difficulties. Throughout these preparations, your mind runs its own parallel ritual. You think about the night ahead with a mixture of resignation and anxiety. You wonder if the temperature will drop further, if the wind will strengthen, if the fire will last. You think about the wood supply and whether it will carry you through to spring. You think about the sounds you will hear in the night and what they might mean. Wolves howling in the distance. The cabin creaking and groaning in the cold. The occasional thump of snow sliding from the roof. You prepare yourself mentally for waking in darkness, for lying there uncertain whether you should get up to check the fire or trust that it is still burning. There is prayer in this ritual for many frontier people, a moment of speaking to whatever God they believe in, asking for protection through the night, expressing gratitude for having survived this far. The prayers are often simple and practical rather than grand and theological. Keep my fire burning. Keep my family safe. Let me wake in the morning. Keep the wolves away. These are prayers born of immediacy, of genuine uncertainty about what the next hours might bring. Finally, there is nothing left to do. The fire is banked. The meal is eaten. The door is latched. The boots are positioned. The clothes are laid out. The prayers are spoken. All the small rituals that stand between you and sleep have been completed. The darkness outside is complete now, pressing against your windows and walls, patient and eternal. You approach your bed knowing what awaits. The cold blankets, the shock of lying down, the long hours of fragmented rest, but you approach it anyway, because your body demands sleep, and the alternative to sleeping poorly is not sleeping at all. And not sleeping at all means being unable to function tomorrow, unable to gather wood, unable to hunt, unable to do the 100 small tasks that survival requires. So you lie down. You pull the blankets up. You curl into yourself and begin the slow process of warming your small space with nothing but your own body heat. The ritual is complete. The night begins. You are lying in darkness now. The fire has been banked to a low glow that barely illuminates the hearth, let alone the rest of your cabin. Above you, the shadows are absolute, deep, and thick and impenetrable. Your eyes strain against the darkness out of habit, trying to see what cannot be seen, then relax into acceptance. This is how nights are on the frontier. This is what darkness meant before electric light changed everything. The first thing you notice, once your eyes give up their hopeless search for light, is the sound. Or rather, the sounds, plural, layered and constant and strange to ears accustomed to gentler environments. The wind is always present, a low moan that rises and falls but never quite stops. It has voices, this wind, different tones as it passes different angles and obstacles around your cabin. Through the gaps in your walls, it whispers and hisses. Against the corners of your roof, it howls and shrieks. Sometimes it pauses for a moment, a breath of stillness that makes the following gust seem even louder by contrast. You have lived with this wind for months now, and you have almost learned to ignore it. Almost. The cabin itself makes sounds that seem almost alive. Wood contracts in extreme cold, and the logs of your walls pop and crack with sharp reports that startle you no matter how many times you have heard them. The The sound is like gunshots sometimes, sudden and violent, and your body tenses instinctively before your mind catches up and identifies the source. The roof groans under its weight of sod and snow, settling into new positions, creaking with a voice that sounds almost mournful. Sometimes a chunk of ice releases from somewhere above you and falls with a soft thump onto your blankets or the floor nearby. These sounds become familiar over time, part of the nighttime music you learn to sleep through, but they never become comfortable. And then there are the animal sounds. The wolves are distant tonight, their howls sliding through the darkness from somewhere miles away, but the sound carries in the cold air with eerie clarity, that long, rising, falling cry that seems to come from the soul of the wilderness itself. You have seen wolves by daylight, gray shadows moving across the snow, and you know they are dangerous only in certain circumstances, when they are desperate with hunger, when they catch you alone and vulnerable. In your cabin, with the door latched, you are probably safe from wolves. Probably. The word is important. Nothing is certain on the frontier. Closer than the wolves, you hear coyotes. Their yipping, chattering calls are more immediate, coming from the hills just beyond your cabin, perhaps from right outside your walls. Coyotes are bolder than wolves, more willing to approach human habitation, more likely to test your boundaries. You have seen their tracks in the snow around your door, evidence of nighttime investigations. They are after your animals, if you have any, your food stores, if they can reach them, any weakness they can exploit. The sound of coyotes close by keeps part of your mind alert, even as the rest tries to surrender to sleep. Occasionally, rarely, you hear the scream of a mountain lion. It is a sound unlike any other, a shriek that seems almost human in its intensity, piercing and terrible and immediately recognizable once you have heard it. Mountain lions are more dangerous than wolves or coyotes, more unpredictable, more capable of breaking through obstacles to reach prey. The good news is they are uncommon in most frontier territories. The bad news is that when they are present, they are a genuine threat. The scream you hear tonight seems distant, perhaps a mile or more away, but you lie awake for long minutes afterward, listening for any sound of approach. Beneath these larger sounds are the smaller ones, the skittering of mice in your walls, tiny feet moving through the spaces you have stuffed with insulation. You have made peace with the mice, more or less. They are just trying to survive the winter too, seeking warmth and food just as you are. As long as they stay in the walls and do not get into your food stores, you can coexist. The scratching and scrambling becomes another layer of the nighttime soundscape, almost companionable in its small persistence. Your own breathing is loud in the silence between sounds. Each exhale frosts in the cold air, though you cannot see it in the darkness. You become aware of your heartbeat, of the small sounds your body makes as you shift position slightly, trying to ease pressure on a hip or shoulder without losing the warmth you have carefully accumulated. Sleep on the frontier is not restful movement. It is careful stillness, interrupted by necessary small adjustments. The fears that accompany frontier sleep are specific and practical. You worry about the fire dying, about waking in a cabin that has dropped too dangerous cold while you slept. You have heard stories of people found frozen in their beds, people whose fires died in the night and who slipped from sleep into hypothermia without ever waking. The transition is said to be gentle, even pleasant, which makes it more terrifying. Your body simply grows cold, degree by degree, and at some point, your sleep becomes something deeper and more permanent. You worry about frostbite, about waking to find that fingers or toes or nose have frozen while you slept despite all your precautions. Frostbite begins with numbness, and how would you notice numbness while sleeping? You have learned to wake periodically, to check your extremities, to wiggle toes and fingers, and confirm that feeling remains. This vigilance fragments your sleep, but may save your digits. You worry about the structural integrity of your shelter. Heavy snow can collapse a roof, especially a sod roof, poorly constructed or inadequately supported. You have reinforced your roof as best you could, but best you could is not the same as sufficient. Every groan and creak could be a warning, and you have learned to distinguish between the normal sounds of contraction and the more ominous sounds of stress. You hope you have learned correctly. You worry about the carbon monoxide from your fire, though you do not know it by that name. You know only that sometimes people are found dead in their cabins with no apparent cause. Their fires burned out and their bodies peaceful as if in sleep. You know this has something to do with air and smoke and ventilation, and you have tried to ensure your chimney draws properly. Your cabin has enough gaps to prevent the air from becoming deadly. But you can never be certain, and on nights when the wind is wrong and smoke backs into the room, you wonder if this will be the night you simply do not wake. The nights are long in winter, so much longer than people accustomed to modern lighting can imagine. The sun sets by 4 or 5 in the afternoon and does not rise until 7 or 8 in the morning. That is 15 hours of darkness, sometimes more. 15 hours when you cannot read because candles are too precious to burn and the firelight is too dim. 15 hours when you cannot work because you cannot see. 15 hours when conversation, if you have anyone to converse with, eventually exhausts itself and silence falls. What do you do with 15 hours of darkness? You sleep in fragments. This is what the body learns to do when darkness lasts so long. You fall asleep shortly after lying down, exhausted from the day's labor, and you sleep hard for perhaps 3 or 4 hours. Then you wake, naturally. Not because anything is wrong, but because your body has temporarily satisfied its most urgent need for rest. You lie there in the darkness, awake and aware, listening to the night sounds, checking mentally on your fire, your body, your surroundings. After an hour or 2 of this quiet wakefulness, you sleep again, another few hours, and wake again. The pattern repeats throughout the night, fragments of sleep separated by periods of watchful rest. This fragmented sleep is not insomnia. Historical records suggest that before artificial lighting became common, many people slept this way. They called the periods first sleep and second sleep, and the wakeful time between them was considered normal, even valuable. People would pray during this midnight wakefulness, or think through problems, or simply lie peacefully in the darkness. On the frontier, this pattern intensifies. The long nights make it almost inevitable, and the need for vigilance makes it almost necessary. Some people use the wakeful periods for quiet productivity. Women knit or mend by feel, their fingers knowing the work so well that light becomes unnecessary. Men whittle small objects, feeling their way along the wood. Others simply lie still, letting their minds wander through memories and plans and prayers. The darkness becomes a space outside of normal time. Neither day nor night in the usual sense. A suspension between worlds where different kinds of thinking become possible, and eventually, always, the darkness begins to fade. The first gray light appears at your window, pale and weak, but present. Morning is coming. You have survived another night. Thank you for staying with me through the long hours of frontier darkness. If you would like to share your thoughts about what we have explored so far, I would love to hear them in the comments below. Where are you listening from tonight? What time is it for you? Your presence in this community of nighttime historians means more than you might know. The drafty cabin we have been exploring is a palace compared to what some frontier dwellers endured on winter nights. As uncomfortable as a leaky log structure might be, as frightening as the sounds of wolves and wind, at least there were walls. At least there was a fire. At least there was a roof, however inadequate, between you and the vast cold sky. Now let us turn our attention to those who had even less, to the cowboys and travelers and hunters who spent winter nights with nothing between them and the killing cold, a fire, and whatever courage they could summon. Picture a cowboy bedding down on the open prairie in December. The day's work is done, such as it is. In winter, cattle work slows, but never quite stops. There are still animals to check on, fences to maintain, wolves to discourage. The cowboy has ridden out from the ranch headquarters to a distant corner of the range, and returning before dark has proved impossible. So he stops where he is, dismounts from his tired horse, and begins the business of making camp. Making camp sounds grand, but looks like almost nothing. He chooses a spot with whatever protection he can find, perhaps a small depression in the land that will shelter him from the wind, perhaps a cluster of rocks or a cut bank along a frozen creek. Perfect spots are rare. Usually he settles for adequate, for less bad, for survivable. He unrolls his bedroll from behind his saddle, a thick bundle of blankets rolled around a canvas tarpaulin that serves as ground cloth, insulation, and shelter all at once. His horse stands nearby, reins dropped to the ground in the ground tie that Western horses are trained to accept. The horse will not wander far, because horses are herd animals, and this human is the only herd available. The cowboy's relationship with his horse is practical and deep in equal measure. This animal is his survival out here, his transportation, his companion, and on cold nights, his heat source. Cowboys often sleep close to their horses, benefiting from the animal's body warmth, the steady sound of its breathing, a comfort in the lonely darkness. Before lying down, the cowboy builds a fire. This is the most critical task of his evening, the difference between miserable survival and potential death. He gathers whatever fuel he can find, dried grass and prairie brush if nothing better is available, driftwood along creeks if he is lucky enough to be near water. The fire he builds is small because fuel is limited, and because a small fire provides warmth more efficiently than a large one that burns out quickly. He positions himself between the fire and something that will reflect heat back toward him. A rock face, a bank of earth, even his saddle propped at an angle. His supper is simple to the point of absurdity. Cold biscuits, if he thought to carry them. Jerked beef that he tears with his teeth. Coffee made in a small pot over the fire. the warmth of the tin cup in his hands as precious as the caffeine in the liquid. He eats slowly because eating is one of the few activities available, and because the longer he sits by the fire, the longer he postpones the inevitable moment of lying down, when he finally spreads his bedroll and lies down, fully clothed in every piece of clothing he owns. The cold of the ground beneath him is immediate and profound. The frozen earth seems to pull heat from his body, drawing it downward despite the canvas and blankets beneath him. He lies on his side with his knees pulled up, his back to the fire, trying to warm one side of his body while accepting that the other side will remain cold. His saddle serves as a pillow, the hard leather surprisingly comfortable when you are tired enough. Sleep comes in snatches between shivers. He wakes every hour or so, sometimes more often, to add fuel to the fire, to shift his position, to simply confirm that he is still alive and the night has not somehow killed him in his sleep. The stars above are impossibly bright, the Milky Way sprawling across the blackness in a display that would seem beautiful if he were not so cold. The silence is enormous, broken only by the crackle of his small fire and the occasional distant sound of coyotes or wolves or wind. The dangers he faces are concrete and numerous. Hypothermia can claim a sleeping man without ever waking him. His fire could die while he sleeps too deeply, leaving him exposed to the full force of the cold. His horse could spook and run, stranding him miles from any help. A predator could approach, testing whether this bundled human shape is worth the risk. Hostile humans, bandits, or enemies could come upon him in the darkness. He keeps his rifle close, within reach, without leaving his blankets. But he knows that in his exhausted state, he might not wake quickly enough to use it. Morning finds him stiff and aching. Frost on his blankets, ice in his mustache, if he has one. He rises slowly, joints protesting, and coaxes his fire back to life for hot coffee and a few minutes of warmth before saddling his horse and continuing his work. This is how cowboys spent countless winter nights, not heroically, not romantically, but simply enduring because endurance was what the job required. Travelers caught between destinations faced similar situations, but often with even less preparation. A man traveling by stagecoach might find himself stranded when a blizzard closes the road, huddled with other passengers in the coach itself, the vehicle's thin walls providing almost no protection against the wind. They would pile every coat and blanket available over themselves, sharing body heat with strangers out of necessity, propriety abandoned in favor of survival. Some coaches carried buffalo robes for just such emergencies, but not all did, and passengers who had not anticipated the possibility of being stranded sometimes froze to death within sight of towns they could not reach. Hunters and trappers, the men who ventured deepest into wild country in pursuit of furs, developed sleep strategies that bordered on the desperate. They learned to build shelters from snow itself, hollowing out drifts to create small caves where body heat could accumulate. They learned to sleep in shifts when traveling with partners, one man staying awake to tend the fire while the other slept. They learned to recognize the signs of hypothermia in themselves, the confusion and drowsiness that signaled danger rather than rest. Many did not survive their education. The mountain men who pushed into the Rockies during the fur trade era told stories around campfires of nights so cold that their breath froze on their blankets, that their fires seemed to give no heat at all. That morning found them unable to move until the sun had warmed their stiffened limbs. These stories were not exaggerations. The temperatures in high mountain valleys could drop to 40 or 50 degrees below zero. Cold that killed horses and men with impersonal efficiency. Some found unexpected shelter. A trapper might stumble upon a cave, a natural overhang, an abandoned native shelter. These discoveries were treasured, remembered, mapped for future use. Word spread through the trapping community about such places, and men would detour miles out of their way to reach a known shelter when winter nights threatened. The difference between sleeping in the open and sleeping beneath even minimal cover could be the difference between life and death. The indigenous peoples of the region observed these struggling newcomers with what must have been a mixture of pity and confusion. They had been surviving winters on these plains for thousands of years, had developed knowledge and technologies and practices perfectly suited to the challenge. When they chose to help struggling white travelers, teaching them how to build proper fires, how to position themselves for warmth, how to read weather signs and find natural shelter. They shared knowledge that had been refined over countless generations. Not all of this knowledge was received with gratitude. Not all of it was understood. Much was lost. What remains from this era is the image of men sleeping under stars so cold they seemed to crackle, wrapped in blankets that were never quite enough, waking repeatedly through the night to feed fires that were all that stood between them and the vast indifference of winter. It was not heroic in the moment. It was not romantic. It was simply what survival required, night after night, until spring came, or death came, or they finally reached shelter that offered better protection. The frontier asked much of those who crossed it. But perhaps it asked most of those who found themselves between destinations, without walls, without roof, with nothing but fire and blankets, and the will to wake in the morning. While European settlers struggled and shivered through frontier winters, often dying from exposure and cold, the indigenous peoples of the plains had been thriving in this same landscape for countless generations. They possessed knowledge that the newcomers desperately needed, but frequently failed to learn. Knowledge about how to live in harmony with winter rather than in constant battle against it. At the heart of this knowledge was a structure so perfectly designed for cold weather survival that it remains something of an engineering marvel even today. The tipi was not simply a tent. It was a sophisticated technology developed over thousands of years, refined through countless winters, designed to work with wind and fire and temperature in ways that seemed almost magical to outside observers. When properly constructed and properly used, a tipi provided warmth and comfort in conditions that left settlers huddling in misery inside their drafty cabins. Let us examine this structure together and try to understand what made it so effective. The shape is the first thing to notice. The conical form is not arbitrary or merely traditional. It is precisely the shape that sheds wind and snow most efficiently. Wind striking a cone flows up and over with minimal resistance, creating no areas of high pressure that might collapse the structure. Snow slides down the sloped sides rather than accumulating on top, preventing the dangerous weight that could bring down a flat or poorly angled roof. The shape is also excellent for internal heat distribution, allowing warm air to rise naturally and circulate in predictable patterns. The poles that form the tipi skeleton were selected and prepared with extraordinary care. Lodgepole pines were preferred in most regions, cut at specific times of year when the sap was low, dried and seasoned according to methods passed down through generations. The poles needed to be straight and strong, but also light enough to transport, flexible enough to withstand wind stress without snapping. A single tipi might require 15 to 25 poles, depending on its size, and a family's pole collection represented significant labor and irreplaceable value. The covering was traditionally made from buffalo hides, somewhere between 12 and 20 hides, depending on the size of the structure. These hides were processed using methods that left them flexible, yet weather-resistant. The processing was women's work, skilled and demanding, transforming raw hides into material that could protect a family through the harshest winters. But the exterior covering was only part of the system. Inside the tipi, a second layer called a liner hung from the poles, creating an air gap between the inner and outer walls. This air gap provided insulation, certainly, but it did something more important. It created a convection system that managed airflow throughout the structure. Cold air entering at the bottom of the tipi was channeled between the liner and outer covering, flowing upward and out through adjustable smoke flaps at the top. This constant gentle movement of air prevented the buildup of smoke and carbon monoxide while maintaining a comfortable interior temperature. The fire in the center of the tipi was the heart of the whole system. Unlike the settler's fireplace, which radiated heat mainly in one direction, the central fire distributed warmth evenly throughout the circular space. The conical shape concentrated heat low, where people actually lived, rather than allowing it to disperse uselessly toward high ceilings. The smoke flaps at the top could be adjusted to control draft, responding to changing wind conditions, pulling smoke out efficiently in ways that baffled European observers accustomed to smoking. Drafty chimneys. The positioning of sleeping areas within the tipi was precise and deliberate. The back of the tipi, directly opposite the entrance, was considered the place of honor and also happened to be the warmest spot, protected from drafts and closest to the reflected heat from the fire. The entrance was always positioned to face east, away from the prevailing westerly winds, a practical choice that also held spiritual significance. Family members had assigned places around the perimeter, their positions relative to the fire and entrance, calibrated for both social custom and thermal comfort. The sleeping materials themselves reflected sophisticated understanding of insulation. Buffalo robes provided the primary covering, their thick fur trapping enormous amounts of still air, their leather backing blocking drafts, but simply lying on the ground would have invited dangerous heat loss through conduction. So beds were raised on platforms of willow branches or other materials, creating air circulation beneath and preventing direct contact with frozen earth. Several layers of hides and furs might be arranged in specific orders, each layer serving a particular purpose in the overall insulation system. The evening routine in a tipi winter camp followed patterns refined over generations. As darkness fell, the fire would be built up and stones would be heated. These heated stones would be distributed around the sleeping area, radiating warmth through the night in a practice similar to what settlers would later adopt, but with more systematic implementation. Children would be bundled first and placed in the warmest positions. Adults would arrange themselves around the perimeter, their bodies providing additional insulation and windbreak for the young and elderly. But the tipi system was not only about physical survival. The spiritual dimensions of winter sleep were equally important to plains peoples. The long nights of winter were considered a time when the barrier between the physical and spirit worlds grew thin, when dreams could carry special significance and power. People prepared for significant dreams through fasting, through prayer, through sleeping with sacred objects like medicine bundles, special stones, or feathers. Young men might separate themselves from the main camp, sleeping alone in smaller structures or even on the open prairie, seeking vision, dreams that would guide their lives. Were these dreams purely spiritual experiences, or were they also influenced by the physical conditions of winter sleep? Modern researchers have noted that many factors common in winter tipis could affect consciousness. The smoke from fires burning throughout the night, the reduced oxygen in sealed spaces, the mild hypoxia that comes from sleeping at high altitudes, the nutritional changes that occurred as winter stores dwindled. All of these could produce altered states of consciousness. Vivid dreams, experiences that felt profoundly real and significant. The dreams themselves were not merely private experiences. They were communal knowledge. A powerful dream would be shared with the tribe, interpreted by elders, sometimes acted upon. Dreams guided hunting strategies, warned of danger, determined the timing of ceremonies and movements. In this way, sleep became not just rest, but a form of intelligence gathering, a way of accessing knowledge that waking consciousness could not reach. Much of this knowledge has been lost. The traditions were oral, passed from generation to generation through teaching and example, and the violence and disruption of colonization interrupted countless chains of transmission. Elders died before they could pass on what they knew. Children were removed to boarding schools where traditional practices were forbidden. Communities were scattered and their collective knowledge dispersed. What remains is fragmentary, tantalizing, enough to suggest how sophisticated the original systems were, but not enough to fully reconstruct them. What we can say with certainty is this: indigenous peoples of the plains slept better in winter than the settlers who replaced them. Multiple observers from the era noted this with some puzzlement. In conditions that left European newcomers exhausted, miserable, often sick or dying, native peoples seemed comfortable, healthy, well. The tipi was part of this difference. The sleeping materials and practices were part of it. The accumulated wisdom of thousands of winters was part of it. The settlers who bothered to learn from indigenous peoples, who swallowed their pride and asked for teaching, often survived more successfully than those who insisted on European methods. Some settlers adopted modified tipi designs for winter camps. Others incorporated buffalo robes and native sleeping practices into their own routines. The best frontier survival strategies were usually hybrid approaches, combining European technologies with indigenous knowledge, but many settlers refused to learn, or learned too slowly, or learned only after suffering had already done its damage. The knowledge was there, offered sometimes freely and sometimes at great cost, but cultural barriers prejudice, and simple stubbornness prevented its full transfer. And so the newcomers continued to shiver in their drafty cabins, while, somewhere not far away, families slept warm and peaceful in their tipis. Protected by wisdom, the settlers could not bring themselves to accept. If this journey through indigenous winter wisdom has touched something in you, I would love for you to tap that like button. It helps other nighttime wanderers find these quiet stories. Now let us continue our exploration into stranger territories, where survival met folklore and mystery. The frontier bred desperate innovation. When European traditions failed and indigenous wisdom remained partly out of reach, settlers invented their own practices. Strange adaptations born from necessity and fear that left traces in the archaeological record and in fragmentary written accounts. Some of these practices made practical sense. Others seemed to blend survival strategy with something closer to ritual or magic. All of them speak to the lengths people would go to find rest in a world determined to deny it. Let us wander through these mysteries together, touching the strange edges of frontier sleep culture in the ruins of sod houses across Nebraska, Kansas, and the Dakotas. Archaeologists have found a recurring artifact: smooth river stones, usually in groups of 4 to 6, positioned near where beds would have been. These stones show clear evidence of repeated heating, discoloration, and sometimes cracking from thermal stress accumulated over years of use. We know from diaries that heating stones in the fire and placing them in beds was common practice, a simple technology for warming blankets before lying down. But the mystery is in the details. Some of these stones have been found wrapped in fragments of cloth that seem out of place on the frontier: silk, fine cotton, materials that were expensive and rare, that required enormous effort to transport into the wilderness, that should have been preserved for special occasions rather than wrapped around heating rocks. Why would a frontier woman use her precious silk to swaddle a stone? The practical explanation suggests heat retention. Finer weaves might hold warmth more efficiently than coarse cloth. But there is something else here, something harder to name. Perhaps wrapping a rough heating stone in beautiful fabric was a way of making survival less brutal, of insisting that beauty mattered even in desperate circumstances. Perhaps the silk against her feet at night, even wrapped around a stone, helped a woman remember she was once someone who owned silk, someone who lived in a world where such things were possible. The frontier stripped so much away. Perhaps wrapping stones in silk was a way of holding on to something that felt like civilization, even stranger. Some stones have been found with symbols scratched into their surfaces: crude crosses, circles, what appear to be initials. Some show elaborate patterns that seem too intentional to be random damage. Were these marks of ownership, ways of identifying your stone in a dark room where many people slept? Were they prayers carved literally into the tools of survival? We do not know. The people who made these marks left no explanations, and their descendants often have no memory of the practice. There are also accounts of settlers burying themselves in straw for warmth, not simply using straw mattresses, but actually burrowing into massive piles of prairie hay-like animals, entering hibernation. This practice appeared most commonly when people had arrived too late to build proper shelter before winter hit. or when early storms destroyed the inadequate structures they had managed to construct. It was desperation made manifest. One woman's diary from Kansas, dated 1869, describes her family spending 2 weeks living, as she put it, as the mice do, in a huge pile of prairie hay with just a small opening for air and a carefully managed tiny fire nearby. She writes of strange dreams they all had during those weeks, of time becoming confused, of waking and not knowing if it was day or night. She writes of her children giggling in the darkness, treating the situation as an adventure, while she lay terrified that they would suffocate, or that their fire would spread into the hay and consume them all. Her entries during those 2 weeks have a dreamlike quality. She describes conversations she is not sure actually happened. She mentions hearing music that could not have been there. At one point, she becomes convinced that several days have passed, only to learn from her husband that less than a day has elapsed. The sensory deprivation of being buried in straw, combined with poor air quality and constant low-level fear, seems to have produced an altered state of consciousness in the entire family. They survived. Many families in similar situations did not, but the diaries of those who died are not available to us. Then there is the phrase that appears in multiple frontier documents, always in reference to winter, always without explanation. Death sleep nights. The phrase is used as if the writer assumes the reader will understand its meaning. We have to reconstruct that meaning from context. These seem to have been nights of such extreme cold that sleep itself became dangerous. Nights when the temperature dropped so low that the line between sleep and death grew terrifyingly thin. Some accounts suggest that on these nights, families would take turns staying awake, watching the sleepers, making sure everyone kept breathing, checking for signs of frostbite or the deadly confusion of hypothermia. The preparations for a death sleep night were elaborate. Every crack in the cabin would be stuffed with whatever could be found. The fire would be built as high as safely possible. Every blanket, quilt, and spare piece of clothing in the household would be piled on the sleeping family. Sometimes multiple families would crowd into a single cabin, sharing body heat and resources in conditions that made normal social boundaries impossible to maintain. But what makes death sleep nights truly mysterious is not the preparation, but the experience. Accounts speak of a quality to the sleep itself, a depth, a heaviness, a sense that those who slept were going somewhere far away. One Montana homesteader writes of his wife on such a night. "She sleeps so deep, I must shake her hard to wake her. Her breath is slow. When she wakes, she speaks of walking in summer fields she knew as a child. She is confused and thinks she is 8 years old. It takes her time to return to herself." This description sounds like hypothermia, the deadly cold that makes its victims sleepy and confused even as it kills them. But it also sounds like something else, like the strange states the body enters when pushed to its limits. Adaptations we do not fully understand even today. The phenomenon of shared dreams deserves attention in this context. Multiple sources from the frontier era speak of people experiencing extraordinarily vivid dreams during winter. Dreams so real that people woke confused about what was memory and what was imagined. More remarkably, there are accounts of multiple people in the same cabin or bunkhouse dreaming similar things. On the same night, a school teacher in Wyoming wrote in 1878 about a night when she and her two boarding students all dreamed of a woman in white walking across the snow. When they compared their dreams in the morning, the details matched. The woman's hair, the direction she was traveling, even the song she was humming. The teacher tried to dismiss it as coincidence, but her journal shows she was deeply shaken. She spent pages trying to rationalize what had happened without success. Modern sleep science suggests possible explanations. Carbon monoxide from poorly ventilated fires can produce shared altered states. Malnutrition, common in late winter, affects brain chemistry in ways that intensify dreams. People sleeping in close proximity influence each other's sleep patterns through sound and movement. But these explanations feel partial, incomplete. They do not quite capture what the sources describe. Archaeological sites continue to reveal mysteries. In the remains of a Montana homestead from the 1870s, researchers found a sleeping alcove built into the cabin wall that should not exist. It is too small for an adult to lie flat, too carefully constructed to be an afterthought, too close to the ceiling to make practical sense. The stones lining it show evidence of repeated heating. Burn marks suggest regular small fires were built inside this tiny space. The current theory is that someone, probably a woman based on artifacts found nearby, slept curled in this alcove on the coldest nights. The elevated position would capture rising heat. The enclosed space would concentrate body warmth. But the psychological dimensions are troubling. Choosing to sleep in such a confined space suggests something more than practical calculation. It suggests desperation, or perhaps a form of comfort-seeking that we do not fully understand. Similar oddities appear at other sites. Sleeping quarters dug into floors, accessible only by ladder. Tiny enclosed spaces built inside larger rooms. Underground pits lined with grass, just large enough for a body, with covers that could be pulled over the top. People were trying anything, everything, to survive the cold. Some of their solutions made practical sense. Others seemed to exist at the edge of sanity, where the pressure of survival pushed people into strange places. The mysteries remain soft and distant as snowfall. We find the artifacts but struggle to understand the experience. We read the words but cannot feel the cold. What we can know is that people, faced with impossible circumstances, found impossible solutions, and that some of those solutions left traces that puzzle us still. And so we arrive at the end of our journey through the frozen nights of the Wild West. The fire in our imagined hearth has burned low, its embers glowing soft orange in the darkness. The wind outside has perhaps gentled, or perhaps we have simply grown accustomed to its voice. The stories we have shared hang in the quiet air between us, fragments of lives lived in cold we can barely imagine. Under stars so bright and indifferent, they seemed to crackle with frost. Let us gather the threads of what we have seen and carry them gently toward rest. We began by asking what it meant to sleep when winter froze the frontier solid, when survival was uncertain, when comfort was a luxury almost no one could afford. We walked through drafty cabins where breath turned to frost on interior walls, where gaps between logs let the wind whisper through like cold fingers exploring in the dark. We felt the shock of sliding into cold blankets, the weight of buffalo robes that smelled of animal and smoke, the careful positioning of heated stones that gave an hour of warmth before becoming merely heavy. We traced the rituals of preparation, the banking of fires, the rationing of wood, the checking and rechecking of doors and windows and gaps. We lay in darkness through the long hours of winter night, listening to wolves and wind and the crack of contracting timber. We woke repeatedly, fragmented rest stolen between moments of vigilance, and we counted the hours until dawn like prayers. We stood with cowboys on frozen prairie, their bedrolls spread on ground so cold it seemed to pull heat from their bodies, their small fires the only light in all that darkness. We walked through bunkhouses where strangers crowded together, their combined body heat more valuable than their privacy, their snoring and shifting becoming a strange kind of lullaby. We looked inside the tipi and glimpsed the sophisticated wisdom of peoples who had been surviving these winters for thousands of years, who understood things about heat and air and shelter that the newcomers were only beginning to learn. We touched the strange mysteries that emerged when desperation met folklore, the heated stones wrapped in silk, the death-sleep nights, the shared dreams that defied explanation. What emerges from all these stories is something both simple and profound. People slept against all odds, despite all discomfort, through conditions that seem unimaginable to us now. They closed their eyes and surrendered to rest, not because they were braver than we are, not because they were stronger or more resilient, but because they had no choice. The body demands sleep. Life requires rest. And so they found ways, however imperfect, however uncomfortable, to give themselves what they needed to continue. Think now about the distance between their sleep and yours. You lie, perhaps, in a room whose temperature is controlled by a thermostat. This device would have seemed like pure magic to a frontier settler. A dial you turn and warmth appears, steady and reliable, requiring no wood to gather, no fire to tend, no vigilance through the night. Your walls are insulated, your windows sealed, your roof solid and waterproof. The wind outside, if there is wind, is just a sound, not a threat constantly testing your shelter for weakness. If you feel cold, you can pull up an extra blanket from a closet where you probably have more blankets than any frontier family owned in total. You are safe from wolves. You are safe from the weather. You can sleep without vigilance, without waking to check your fire, without monitoring your fingers and toes for frostbite, without listening for sounds that might mean danger. This is no small thing. This is a victory so complete that we barely notice it anymore. But it was won by those who came before, who endured the cold nights, who learned through bitter experience what worked and what did not, who built better shelters and passed that knowledge forward, generation by generation, until warmth became ordinary instead of miraculous. The frontier sleepers did not know they were part of this progression. They were simply trying to survive. Winter after winter, they made their preparations and lay down in their cold beds and hoped to wake in the morning. But their persistence, their refusal to give up even when sleep became a test of endurance, created the foundation for everything that came after. There is something almost heroic in this, though it was not meant to be heroic. It was simply what was required. The quiet, unheroic persistence of ordinary people doing what must be done, closing their eyes despite the cold, breathing slowly despite the fear, trusting that morning would come even when the night seemed endless, and morning always came. The sun always rose, pale and cold, but present, breaking the darkness one more time. The frontier sleepers would wake, stiff and tired and still cold, and they would begin again. The rhythm of survival repeated endlessly until eventually winter loosened its grip and spring returned. Impossibly, mercifully, with its warmth and light and relief, we cannot truly know what their experience felt like. We can read their words and examine their artifacts, reconstruct their shelters, and study their conditions. But the interior experience, what it felt like to be cold for so long that cold became your natural state, what it felt like to drift toward sleep uncertain if you would wake, what dreams came in those circumstances and what they meant. This remains beyond our reach. Perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps some experiences belong entirely to those who lived them. We can honor the frontier sleepers without fully understanding them. We can acknowledge their struggle without appropriating it. We can be grateful for what they endured without romanticizing it, because it was not romantic. It was cold and uncomfortable and frightening and exhausting. It damaged bodies and broke spirits and claimed lives. Not every winter sleeper woke in the spring. Not every family survived intact. The frontier was beautiful in many ways, but the winter nights were not among its beauties. They were its test, its cruelty, its way of separating those who could endure from those who could not. And yet people did endure. More than that, they found moments of warmth even in the cold. The comfort of another body sharing your blankets. The brief pleasure of heated stones wrapped in cloth. The satisfaction of banking a fire just right so it lasted through the night. The relief of waking to find everyone safe, everyone breathing. Another night survived. Small victories, but real ones. Enough to keep going, enough to try again the next night and the next dot as you drift now toward your own sleep. Warm and safe and comfortable beyond the wildest dreams of any frontier settler. Perhaps you can carry with you an awareness of this inheritance. The warmth you enjoy was not always available. The security you feel was not always certain. What seems ordinary to you was extraordinary to them. Worth suffering for, worth building toward, worth all those cold nights endured in the hope that someday, somehow, it would get better. And it did get better. Slowly, incrementally, over generations. The cabins became houses. The houses gained insulation. The stoves improved. Knowledge accumulated, was shared, was refined. Each winter taught its lessons. And those lessons were not forgotten. You are the beneficiary of all that learning, all that suffering, all those nights when people refused to surrender to the cold. Your comfortable bed, your warm room, your peaceful sleep, these were built on a foundation of thousands of uncomfortable nights endured by people whose names we will never know. This is worth remembering, not to make you feel guilty for your comfort, but to help you appreciate it fully. To sleep warm is a privilege. And like all privileges, it is made more meaningful by awareness of what came before. So, sleep well tonight. Let yourself drift without resistance, without the vigilance that frontier nights demanded. Trust your walls to hold, your roof to remain solid, your warmth to last until morning. Trust that you will wake, that morning will come, that the cold cannot reach you here. And if you dream, Perhaps you will dream of winter, not the brutal winters of the Wild West, but a gentler winter scene from inside a warm room. Snow falling soft beyond the glass, stars bright and cold but distant, the world beautiful because you are safe from it, comfortable because others were not. This is the gift of all those who slept in the cold, that we do not have to, that their endurance earned our ease, that the nights they suffered through have finally given way to nights of peace. The fire has died to embers now. The story is told. The long winter night of the frontier has passed into history, and we remain here in our own time, with our own warm beds waiting. Rest well, knowing you are safe. Sleep deeply, honoring those who could not. And when you wake, as you will, as they did morning after morning, perhaps you will notice, just for a moment, how good it feels to wake warm. How miraculous it is to have survived the night without struggle. How far we have come from those frozen cabins and crude bedrolls under merciless stars. The frontier sleepers would tell you, if they could. Sleep is a gift. Warmth is a blessing. And the ability to close your eyes without fear is something to treasure every single night. So treasure it now. Let the weight of your blankets comfort you. Let the warmth of your room hold you. Let the darkness be peaceful rather than threatening. Let sleep come easy, as it so rarely came to them, and drift now, gently, into rest. The cold cannot reach you here.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please subscribe and leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be as peaceful as a calm sea beneath a patient, turning light. Share.